Captain Daniel Reyes had spent most of his life inside steel walls and among soldiers. He was a man of discipline, a man who believed in rules and orders. From the deserts of Earth to the far colonies of Mars, his life had been one mission after another. He never thought he would one day be asked to protect royalty, and not just human royalty, but an alien princess whose name carried weight across the stars. When the Galactic Council assigned him to this duty, Daniel felt a strange mixture of pride and unease. Pride, because humanity was still young among the stars, still proving itself to the ancient empires who had watched the universe for thousands of years. To be chosen as protector of a princess meant that humans were finally being trusted. Unease, because he had no idea what it meant to live beside royalty, much less royalty from another species. The first time he saw Princess Solari, he almost forgot to breathe. She was unlike anything he had imagined. Her skin shimmered like silver, touched with blue, glowing faintly under the palace lights. Her hair fell like liquid crystal, moving as if it carried a life of its own. Her eyes were large, luminous, and filled with something Daniel could not describe, like the endless depth of the night sky. She was tall, graceful, and every movement she made felt as if it had been rehearsed 1,000 times to him. She looked untouchable. Solari was born of the Lumerian Empire, one of the oldest and most powerful civilizations known in the galaxy. Her people spoke of her as a symbol of hope, a jewel of peace, meant to one day unite warring factions. She was adored by the masses, praised by poets, painted by artists. Every word she spoke in public was followed with devotion, every smile recorded as history, and yet, when Daniel stood in the shadows of her palace chambers, he noticed something that others did not. Behind her smiles, there was silence. Behind her graceful gestures, there was weight. When the feasts ended and the councils dispersed, when the lights dimmed and the music stopped, Solari would look toward the stars with eyes that did not shine with joy, but with longing. Daniel was trained not to question. His orders were simple: guard her, keep her safe, and never interfere with her life. But he was human, and curiosity was carved into his very soul. He could not help but wonder, what did a princess, beloved by billions, long for? At first, Daniel thought it was his imagination. Perhaps she was only tired, worn by duty. But as the days passed, the feeling grew stronger. Her eyes carried a secret sadness, one that no one else dared to notice or dared to speak of. Daniel found himself watching her more closely, not just as a guard, but as a man trying to understand another soul. He saw the way her hands would sometimes tighten at her sides when others praised her. He noticed how her laughter in public never quite reached her eyes. He saw her stop, just for a moment, when children in the palace garden chased each other freely, their joy unchained by destiny. He wondered if she envied them. One evening, after a long day of ceremonies, Daniel found himself standing in the corner of a grand hall while Solari addressed her people. She spoke words of unity and sacrifice, of duty and peace. Her voice carried like a song, perfect and flawless. The crowd cheered, banners waved. The sound of devotion filled the air. But as Daniel's gaze stayed fixed on her, he caught it again just for a second. A flicker in her eyes, a shadow in her smile. When the hall emptied, Daniel walked behind her, his armor clinking softly with every step. He did not speak. He was not supposed to. But his heart was uneasy. Solari stood at the balcony, staring out into the endless sea of stars. The wind carried the faint scent of alien flowers. She did not turn to him, but her voice came, soft and fragile, almost as if she was speaking to herself. "Do you ever wonder," she whispered, "what it would feel like to choose your own life?" Daniel froze. His training told him to stay silent, but his heart ached at the sound of her voice. For the first time, he realized that behind all the perfection, all the shining light of royalty, there was something else. loneliness. Daniel had thought his duty was simple: to shield her from blades and bullets, to stand between her and danger. But in that moment, he understood there were other dangers too. The kind that could not be fought with weapons. The kind that came from within the heart. He looked at her, the alien princess whose beauty carried the weight of empires, and he felt something stirred deep inside him, a question he could not ignore, and a bond he had not expected to begin. The days in the palace followed a rhythm, like the beating of a slow and heavy drum. Every morning, Princess Solari was dressed in fine robes by her attendants, her silver-blue skin brushed with glowing powders that made her appear more radiant than she already was. Every afternoon, she sat through councils, where old men argued about politics, trade, and war. Every evening, she dined with nobles, who praised her beauty and spoke of alliances as if she were not a person, but a piece of land to be traded. And every hour, Captain Daniel Reyes followed her. He was always close, standing at the back of the hall, guarding the doors of her chambers, walking a step behind her through the endless marble corridors. He was her shadow, her shield, her silent protector. His armor was polished but scarred, his weapons always ready. And yet, as the days stretched on, Daniel began to feel that the greatest danger she faced was not from assassins or enemies, but from the invisible chains wrapped tightly around her soul. At first, it was only small things he noticed. When she smiled at the counselors, her lips curved, but her eyes stayed empty. When she gave speeches to her people, her voice was perfect, but her hands trembled ever so slightly when no one was looking. When the halls were filled with laughter, she looked toward the sky, as if searching for something far beyond reach. Daniel tried to push the thoughts away. His job was protection, not curiosity. But he was human, and humans were creatures of heart as much as of mind. He could not stop himself from wondering what it was she carried behind that mask of grace. One night, he found the answer. The palace had grown quiet. Most of the staff were asleep, and the stars outside glimmered like frozen sparks across the dark sky. Daniel was walking his usual patrol when he noticed Solari slipping out into the gardens, alone. It was unusual. She was almost never without her attendants. Something in his chest told him to follow, though he made sure to keep his steps silent. She moved gracefully among the tall glowing flowers, her silver robe trailing across the ground like liquid moonlight. Finally, she stopped by the fountain at the garden's heart. Daniel watched from a distance as she lowered her hands into the water, staring at the ripples with a sadness that struck him like a blade. And then she spoke. "Do you ever wish to be free from duty?" Daniel stiffened. He realized with a shock that she was speaking to him. For a moment, he did not know how to answer. He was trained to follow orders, not share feelings. But her voice was so soft, so heavy with sorrow, that the soldier inside him broke, leaving only the man. "Yes," he said at last. "Sometimes I do." Solari turned her head slightly, her luminous eyes meeting his. For the first time, Daniel did not see a princess. He saw a young woman who longed for something simple, something real. "I was born for this role," she said quietly. "Born to marry for power, not for love. Born to serve my people, not myself. Every choice of mine has already been written. Before I could even speak. They call it honor. They call it destiny. But sometimes, her voice cracked just slightly. Sometimes it feels like a cage." The words struck Daniel deeper than he expected. He had always believed in honor, in sacrifice, in doing what must be done. Yet, when he heard them from her lips, they did not sound noble. They sounded cruel. He wanted to tell her she was strong, that duty was worth it. But when he opened his mouth, no words came. Because looking into her eyes, he understood the truth. She did not need a soldier's comfort. She needed someone to see her pain. The garden was silent, except for the soft flow of water. The moonlight fell across her face, and Daniel thought he had never seen anyone look so fragile, yet so brave. Solari had shown the galaxy nothing but perfection, and here she was, revealing the one thing no one else was allowed to see: her longing. Daniel's chest tightened. He had faced battles, wounds, and loss, but nothing had ever made him feel as powerless as this moment. He wanted to take her pain away, to give her freedom, to show her that she was more than a crown. But what right did he have? He was only her guard, a soldier of a young species, a stranger among her people, so he stayed silent, his heart burning with words he could not speak. Solari turned back to the fountain, her reflection rippling on the surface. "Forgive me," she said softly, almost as if she regretted speaking at all. "You should not hear such things. You are here to protect me, not to listen to my weakness." But Daniel thought differently. It did not feel like weakness. It felt like truth. That night, as he returned to his post, her words stayed with him. They echoed in his mind like a song he could not forget. For the first time since his assignment began, Daniel understood that protecting Princess Solari might mean more than guarding her body. It might mean guarding the small flame of her heart, part of her that still longed to be free. And in that realization, something inside him began to change. For a while, life inside the palace seemed calm. The great halls shone with crystal light, the banners of the Lumerian Empire fluttered proudly, and the sound of music often echoed through the corridors. On the surface, everything looked perfect. But Daniel knew better. The whispers had started weeks earlier, rumors of unrest, enemies who wanted Solari gone, factions that believed her death would spark chaos and give them power. Daniel's instincts sharpened each day. He checked every corner, studied every face, and never left her side. He felt the storm coming even when others laughed at the idea of danger. And one night, the storm finally arrived. It began with a tremor. The walls of the palace shivered, and the ground rumbled under Daniel's boots. Solari was in her chambers, preparing for another endless meeting, when the sound of an explosion ripped through the night. The windows shook, a tower in the distance lit up with fire, and the palace alarms screamed, "Stay behind me!" Daniel barked as he drew his weapon. The princess froze for a moment, fear flickering in her bright eyes, then nodded. Outside, screams echoed through the halls. Guards were already rushing to defend, but the attack was brutal and coordinated. The enemy had come prepared. Shadows moved quickly through the corridors, mercenaries dressed in dark armor, their rifles glowing with deadly plasma light. They cut down guards with merciless precision, heading straight towards Solari's wing of the palace. Whoever sent them wanted only one thing: the princess dead. Daniel's blood ran hot. Every part of his training surged alive. He grabbed Solari's hand firmly. "We move. Now." He led her through the smoke-filled corridors as explosions shook the palace walls. Every turn they made was filled with chaos: fallen guards, broken statues, and the sound of plasma bolts tearing through marble. Daniel fired back when he had to, his shots striking true, but he knew they could not stay and fight. They had to escape. Solari's breath came quick and sharp as they ran. Her long robes tangled at her feet, but she never let go of his hand. For all her royal strength, she was still just a woman in that moment, frightened, fragile, but trusting him with her life. At one corner, 3 mercenaries appeared, weapons raised. Daniel shoved Solari against the wall, shielding her with his body. Plasma fire screamed past them, searing the stone. He returned fire with deadly calm, dropping 2 before the third rushed him with a blade. The clash was brutal. Sparks flew as metal met metal. Daniel gritted his teeth, forcing the mercenary back before driving his own blade through the attacker's armor. The man fell with a cry, and Daniel stood, chest heaving, armor scorched, but still unbroken. Solari stared at him, wide-eyed. You risk your life so freely." Daniel's voice was rough. "That's my job." But deep inside, he knew it was more than a job. They pressed on, smoke choking the air. The palace that once shone with beauty now felt like a battlefield of ruins. When they finally reached the hidden passageway beneath the throne hall, Daniel keyed the lock with trembling fingers. The walls opened, revealing the narrow tunnel that led to the escape hangar. They stumbled inside, the sound of battle still raging behind them. Daniel's body burned with pain. His armor was cracked, scorched, and blood dripped from his side. Yet he did not slow. He could not slow. Every step was meant to shield her. Every breath meant to keep her alive. Finally, they reached the hangar. A small escape shuttle stood ready. Daniel pushed Solari inside and took one last look at the palace. Fire rose into the night sky, painting the heavens red dot as he set the controls, and the shuttle lifted into space. Solari turned to him. Tears glimmered on her cheeks, catching the glow of the stars. "Why do you risk so much for me?" she whispered. Daniel looked at her, his face worn with battle, his heart heavy but certain. He wanted to say, "Because it's my duty." That was the answer everyone expected from a soldier, but the words would not come. He thought of her eyes in the garden, her voice filled with longing, her pain hidden behind duty. Instead, he spoke the truth. "Because you matter." Solari's lips parted in shock, and for a long moment, the silence between them was more powerful than the chaos they had left behind. The palace was burning, the empire was trembling, but in that fragile, dangerous moment, something new was born between them, something that no assassin's blade could ever destroy. The shuttle drifted through the silence of space, far from the burning palace. Princess Solari sat beside Daniel, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She did not speak at first, and Daniel did not press her. He could see the tremor in her fingers, the way her eyes stayed fixed on the stars outside the window. Everything she had ever known, the safety of the palace, the pride of her people, the comfort of routine, had been shattered in one night. Daniel's side ached where the plasma bolt had burned through his armor, but he ignored the pain. His focus was on the woman sitting next to him. She was alive. That was all that mattered. After hours of silent travel, they landed on a distant moon. It was a quiet place, far from the main trade routes, with no city lights and no sound of war. Only forests of tall silver trees and a sky filled with endless stars. The shuttle settled in a clearing, and for the first time since the attack, Solari let out a shaky breath. Daniel scanned the surroundings carefully before lowering his weapon. "We'll stay here," he said firmly. "No one will find us." Nodded, but her eyes still shimmered with fear and something else, something Daniel could not yet name. In the days that followed, their lives changed completely. There were no councils, no noble banquets, no endless speeches. Instead, there was silence, broken only by the wind moving through the silver trees and the crackle of the fire. Daniel built each night. Daniel showed Solari how to cook simple meals from ration packs. At first, she wrinkled her nose at the bland food, laughing softly at her own clumsy attempts. But over time, she learned to stir the pot, to taste the soup, to smile at the small victories. "This is nothing like the palace feasts," she joked once, holding up a spoon of poorly cooked stew. Daniel chuckled. "It's not about taste. It's about surviving." Solari looked at him then, her laughter fading into a softer expression. "Maybe surviving is what I've always wanted. To live simply, without crowns or chains." At night, when the fire burned low, Solari would hum songs Daniel had never heard before. Soft, haunting melodies from her childhood, songs she had never dared to sing in the great halls of the empire. Her voice floated through the quiet night like a prayer, and Daniel listened, feeling the weight of her loneliness and the beauty of her courage. One evening, as the stars shimmered above, Solari spoke again of her secret dreams. "When I was young," she whispered, her eyes glowing in the firelight, "I wanted to be an explorer, to see the galaxies with my own eyes, not through the eyes of advisors, to choose where I would go and who I would love. But the council told me my path was chosen. My marriage would unite empires. My life would not be my own." Her words struck Daniel like an arrow. He stared at the flames, struggling to hold back what he felt. He had always believed his life was only duty, that emotions had no place in a soldier's heart. But now, sitting beside her, hearing her dreams, he realized his heart had already chosen. He wanted her to be free. He wanted to be the one who gave her that freedom, but he stayed silent. What right did he have? He was just a soldier from Earth, a protector assigned by fate. She was a princess, born of an ancient empire. Their worlds were too far apart, their stations too different. And yet, when she leaned gently against him that night, resting her head on his shoulder, Daniel did not move away. He sat still, his heart racing, afraid that if he spoke, the fragile moment would shatter. Lara closed her eyes, whispering words so soft he almost did not hear them. With you, I feel safe, not as a princess, but as myself. Daniel's breath caught. He wanted to tell her she was more than safe, that she was seen, that she was cherished, that she was no longer alone. But his throat tightened, and he said nothing. The fire burned low. The stars watched silently, and the silver trees swayed gently in the night wind. In that hidden refuge, far from crowns and councils, a bond was quietly being forged, not by duty, not by destiny, but by two hearts that had finally found each other in the vastness of the universe. And though neither spoke the truth aloud, both knew it. Something had changed forever. The moon gave them peace, but peace never lasts forever. For a time, Princess Solari and Captain Daniel Reyes lived quietly among the silver forests. She learned how to start a fire with his help, how to cook simple food, how to walk barefoot on soft earth without worrying about robes and ceremonies. And Daniel, who had lived most of his life behind steel walls and military orders, found himself learning how to laugh again, how to sit beside another soul without feeling the weight of duty crushing him. But deep down, both of them knew it was only borrowed time. The Lemurian Empire was vast, and it could not lose its princess forever. One morning, as the two sat by the fire, the sound of engines echoed in the sky. Daniel's heart sank instantly. He knew that sound ships, heavy and powerful, descending through the clouds. Solari's hand trembled as she reached for him. They've found us. Daniel tightened his grip on his weapon. Stay close to me. Moments later, the clearing filled with light as the council's fleet landed. Dozens of armored escorts stepped forward, their banners bright and proud. And behind them came the councilors, tall, stern, their faces hard as stone. One of them spoke, his voice deep and commanding. Princess Solari, your people need you. The Empire has fallen into unrest in your absence. It is time you returned to your throne. The marriage must go forward. Only then will peace be secured. Solari stood frozen. The fire behind her crackled softly, but her heart was louder, pounding painfully in her chest. She looked at Daniel, then at the council. Her whole life seemed to close in around her again, like the walls of a cage. Daniel's throat tightened. He wanted to shout, to tell them she wasn't theirs to command, to stand between her and the council, the way he had stood between her and the mercenaries. But he also knew the truth. This was her choice. Solari's lips parted, her voice trembling. If I go back, I lose myself. I lose the small freedom I've found here. She turned to Daniel, her eyes filled with sorrow. But if I stay, I lose my people. They will suffer without me. Daniel felt his chest ache. She was torn between her heart and her duty, between love and responsibility, and he could not take that decision from her. He lowered his weapon, his voice rough with emotion. Whatever you choose, I'll stand by you. The councilors pressed harder, their words sharp as knives. Princess, you were born for this. Your life belongs to your people. Your marriage will save thousands from war. Do not dishonor your blood. Solari's hand shook. She looked down, remembering the children who had smiled at her in the gardens, the billions who depended on her face for hope. Then she lifted her eyes, glancing at Daniel. the man who had risked his life for her, the man who had seen her not as a symbol, but as a soul. Her heart was breaking. Daniel's eyes met hers, steady and silent. He wanted her to stay. He wanted to hold her forever in their small refuge, to hear her laughter by the fire, to keep her safe from crowns and chains. But he also knew he could not be selfish. She was more than his dream. She was the future of an empire. Finally Solari spoke. Her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of galaxies. I do not want this fate, but I cannot abandon my people. The words fell heavy between them. Daniel closed his eyes, his heart twisting with pain. He wanted to beg her not to go, to tell her that her people could find another way. But he saw the strength in her face, the resolve that made her a princess, and he knew he had no right to stop her. The counselors moved forward, preparing to escort her back. Solari turned one last time, her eyes locking onto Daniel's. Tears shimmered in her gaze, and for a moment, she looked as though she might run back to him. Instead, she whispered, "Forgive me." Daniel stood in silence as she walked away, her silver-blue figure swallowed by the banners of her empire. His fists clenched at his sides, his heart screaming with everything he could not say. He had protected her with his life, but now he had to protect her with his silence. As the ships rose into the sky, carrying her back to her throne, Daniel remained in the clearing alone. The fire burned low, the wind moved gently through the silver trees, and the moon that had been their refuge suddenly felt colder, emptier. The choice had been made, and it had broken them both. The grand crystal hall of the Lumerian capital shone brighter than ever. Tall spires of glass stretched into the heavens, glowing with silver light. Thousands of nobles, generals, and citizens had gathered to witness the ceremony that would bind Princess Solari to a powerful ally. Music echoed through the chamber, voices sang praises, and the banners of the empire waved proudly. To everyone watching, it was a day of glory, a day that would mark the end of unrest, a day where Solari would fulfill the destiny written for her at birth. But for Solari, it was a day of chains. She walked slowly down the long aisle, her gown flowing like liquid light, her crown glimmering with jewels. The crowd cheered as she passed, their voices echoing against the high crystal walls. Yet she felt none of it. Her heart was heavy, her steps dragged by the weight of duty, and at the edge of the hall, hidden among the guards and shadows, Daniel stood. He had been called back only to serve as a soldier, not as her protector anymore. He wore no badge of honor, no place of importance. Yet his eyes never left her. Every step she took toward that altar tore at his soul. He remembered the firelit nights on the moon, her laughter when she spilled stew, her songs under the stars. And now, he watched her being led to a cage dressed as a crown. The High Counselor raised his voice, deep and commanding. "Princess Solari, by this union you will bring peace to your people. Do you swear to bind yourself to this vow, for the sake of the Empire?" The hall grew silent. Everyone waited for her answer. Solari's chest rose and fell. She looked at the altar, at the man chosen for her, an ally she barely knew, a stranger whose hands trembled with eagerness for power. Then her gaze drifted across the hall, and she found him. Daniel. He stood still, but his eyes burned with a quiet fire. He did not speak. He could not. Yet in his gaze, she found something the council could never give her: truth. Her heart pounded. She remembered his words in the shuttle, spoken with such raw honesty. "Because you matter." The silence stretched longer. The counselors grew uneasy. The nobles leaned forward. The entire empire held its breath. And then Solari spoke. Her voice rang out, clear and strong, echoing through the crystal hall. "No." Gasps filled the chamber. The music faltered. The banners seemed to freeze in the air. "I will not marry for politics," she declared, her voice gaining strength. "I will not bind myself in chains and call it honor. I will not pretend that duty means losing my soul. My people deserve a leader who is honest with them, and I deserve a life that belongs to me. The High Counselor stepped forward, his face pale with fury. Princess, you dishonor your crown. Without this union, there will be chaos. Solari's eyes blazed. Then let there be chaos, if peace is built on lies. I will not be a prisoner to tradition. I will lead my people with truth, not with chains. The hall erupted. Nobles shouted, generals muttered, the council cried out in outrage. Yet among the chaos, something else happened. The crowd, the citizens who had come to watch, began to cheer. They shouted her name, their voices rising louder than the council's fury. For the first time, they saw not just a princess, but a leader brave enough to defy the very system that caged her. And then Solari turned her gaze back to Daniel, her eyes softened, shimmering with unspoken words. In front of the entire empire, she said, this human. He risked everything for me. He showed me what freedom means. I will not betray that. Daniel's breath caught. He felt every eye turned toward him, but he did not care. His heart raced. His chest burned, and in that moment, he realized he had never been more proud in his life. The counselors shouted threats, demanded her removal, called her reckless. But the voices of the people drowned them out. Solari, Solari, they cried, their chants shaking the crystal walls. Solari stood tall, her silver blue skin glowing like fire, her crown shining not as a symbol of obedience but of defiance. For the first time in her life, she was free, and Daniel, standing in the shadows, knew he had witnessed something greater than any battle, greater than any war. He had watched a princess break her chains. The empire trembled after Solari's defiance. The council was furious, their carefully built plans shattered in front of the entire galaxy. Nobles whispered of betrayal, generals threatened rebellion, and enemies outside the empire waited eagerly to strike at the first sign of weakness. But something stronger rose to meet the storm. The people, the citizens who had watched their princess speak that day, carried her words like fire in their hearts. They saw not rebellion but courage, not weakness but truth. For the first time, they saw a ruler who dared to stand against chains, who dared to say she was not a tool of politics, but a leader of her people. Crowds filled the streets, shouting her name, demanding that the council listen. Solari's defiance became more than her on it, became the voice of her empire. Yet through all the noise, all the fury, all the rising tide of change, Daniel remained by her side. He had no crown, no council seat, no noble blood. He was only a soldier from Earth, a protector who had been sent to guard her body. But in her heart, he was more than that. He was the one who had seen her pain when no one else dared to. He was the one who had given her the courage to choose. Together, they faced the storm. When the council tried to remove her from power, the people blocked the palace gates. When foreign factions threatened war, Solari stood tall, her voice unshaken, promising her people she would not bend. Each time she spoke, Daniel stood close, silent but steady. His presence a reminder of the night he had carried her through fire, and slowly, the tide turned. The council, once untouchable, began to break under the weight of the people's will. Solari's leadership grew stronger, not because of fear or tradition, but because her people believed in her. She no longer needed arranged vows or political chains to hold her empire together. She had something far greater: trust. But even as her throne became stronger, her heart remained restless. One evening, after a long day of council meetings and speeches, Solari stood at the balcony of the palace, staring at the stars. The air was cool, the city below alive with lights and voices calling her name. And yet, in her heart, she felt the same longing she had once whispered in the garden, the longing to be free. Not as a princess, but as herself. She sensed his presence before she heard his steps. Daniel stood a few feet away, his armor polished, but scarred, his face calm but his eyes filled with something deeper. You should be resting. he said quietly. Solari smiled faintly, her gaze still on the stars. I have carried crowns all day. Rest is a gift I rarely find. Daniel hesitated, then stepped closer. He had walked through fire for her, fought death for her, and yet, in this quiet moment, he felt more vulnerable than ever. You have changed everything, he said at last. Not just for your people, for me, too. Solari turned, her silver blue eyes glowing in the starlight. And you, Daniel Reyes, changed me. Without you, I would still be a prisoner. You showed me that I could choose, that I could be more than duty. Her words struck him harder than any battle ever had. He wanted to tell her what he had buried inside him since the night on the moon, that he loved her, not as a princess, but as the woman who had leaned on him by the fire, who had sung softly beneath the stars. But before he could speak, Solari closed the distance. Her hand rose, trembling slightly, and rested against his chest. I no longer want to dream of freedom, she whispered. I want to live it, and I want to live it with you. Daniel's breath caught. For a moment, the galaxies seemed to fall silent around them. All the battles, the duty, the fear, they all melted away. There was only her hand, warm against his heart, and the truth shining in her eyes. Slowly, gently, he took her hand in his. Then you'll never be alone again. The stars above blazed brighter. The city below roared with chants of her name. And in that quiet space between two souls, a promise was made. Not of crowns, not of politics, but of something stronger: love. Solari ruled with courage, and Daniel stood with her through every storm. She gave her people hope, and he gave her the freedom of choice she had long been denied. Together, they built not just a stronger empire, but a bond that would outlast kingdoms and wars. He had once been tasked with protecting a princess, but in the end, he had given her freedom, and she had given him forever.